Welcome, everybody. My name is Jean Jernigan. I'm the president of the Auburn Hills Chamber of Commerce. I'll also introduce you to my colleague, Alex Drake. He is our graphics and marketing manager. My apologies, Alex, for that. Just rolls off the tongue. Anyway, I am so excited that you've been able to join us this morning for this really provocative topic that obviously is very timely, the managing the remote return to the office dilemma. And I am so pleased to introduce you to our expert presenter, Davin Silvano. And so Davin is the president and CEO of Purpose Point. Davin, I've known Davin for a number of years. I'm so thankful to say he is the chair of our Workforce Development Committee. And for those of you who aren't familiar, our Workforce Development Committee is specifically made up of HR executives, business owners, chief operations officers, from companies with 25 or more employees. And so we meet quarterly, and anyone who falls within that category, of course, is welcome to join us. On the other note, though, let's take it back and start talking more about Davin. Davin has a long, successful history of working with major, Fortune 500 companies, helping to lead them and guide them, not just from a coaching perspective, but along with engaging and working with them with their employees. He also, as part of the Purpose Point, their goal is to help companies throughout the world. And I think that you can look at the success of what he and those who work for him have done and some of the ways that they've been able to be game changers for those companies. And another thing to consider too is the fact that he is a channel partner of the Ken Blanchard companies. And Davin, I'll let you, I'm sure within your, you'll talk about Ken, because I know he is so impactful as far as for you and your organization. But he's also an ambassador member of the C12 group and a founding member of the Talent Champions Council. So on that note, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Davin Silvano. Wait, I'm sorry. I also want to put a shameless plug in for the Purpose Summit. We have been involved with the Purpose Summit for when the first one was held in 2019, and it was so impactful. I cannot wait for this year's Purpose Summit, which is going to be held May 11th through the 13th. And if you get a chance after this, we'll send you the link to the website, because you are welcome to participate either in person or virtually for this event. And there are some really amazing speakers lined up for this, and it's 3 days of meaningful, engaging conversation and how you can make a difference for yourself and for your business. And then at the same time, I would be remiss if I didn't also talk about his book, Finding Purpose at Work. So if you want to talk about engaging with your employees, this is a very great, easy read that we ordered these for our staff, and we are going through the process of making this more of like a book club employee engagement endeavor right now for us. And it's really been a lot of fun. Okay, now I will turn it over to you, Davin.
Well, Jean, that was the kindest and lengthiest, I think, introduction that I've ever been given. I'm very, very honored and grateful to be here today, and grateful for our team who some of them are on this call, and they've just done an incredible job of helping so many organizations through this very challenging time that we've all been living through. And so everything that we're going to talk about and share today is really real life experience that we've learned, insights that we've gleaned. I'm going to share some things from organizations we've served, a lot of things that our team has come up with, a lot of teams that our partners have come up with. I'm going to share some things from C12, as you mentioned today, and some things from the Blanchard company. So, there is no doubt that this is the biggest challenge facing organizations today. The one thing that we all have in common in this season of time is that we are all dealing with this idea of, do we continue to work at home? Do we continue to meet in person? What's safe? What's not safe? How does that affect us? How does that impact our teams? How does that impact our clients? And so I want to kind of take us back before COVID, to happier times, if you will, when life was normal, and talk about some things that were already in place, because we were ultimately going to end up at this conversation with or without COVID. COVID just accelerated the conversation. So I want to share a little bit of insight on that, and then we'll talk about how this season has impacted both employers and employees and what the actual challenge is. And then we'll share some things that you can actually do to go back and think about on how you can have this conversation and make decisions in a way that move us forward purposely, engagingly, and in a way that is healthy for both you as an organization, as a leader, and for your teams. So how did we get here? So there is this thing. Sorry, I don't know why this isn't advancing, but I'm going to have to do this manually, I guess. So there is this thing called the purpose economy that we now find ourselves in. And it's a book written by Aaron Hurst. Aaron Hurst actually wrote this book, The Purpose Economy, back in 2013. So this was almost a prophetic book in which he talked about we had been in kind of the service economy where companies were competing based off of price and service. And then we moved into the experience economy where organizations were competing both for clients and for talent based off of the experience that you get from either working at an organization or working with an organization. So service and price almost took a back space based compared to how does a company make me feel when I engage with them, either as a client or as an employee? And then that transitioned into the purpose economy, which really was an evolution of who does this company help me become as a client or as an employee? So by either doing business with this company or working for this company, am I progressing towards who it is I want to become or the goals that I want to accomplish in life? And that gave birth to the purpose economy. And this cartoon is directly out of his book. And it's one of my favorite cartoons because it illustrates so much. It illustrates this rising tsunami of purpose, of meaningful work, of belonging, of impact, and not purpose from a CSR, corporate social responsibility standpoint. That's not what we're talking about here. What we are talking about is literally contributing to something outside of ourselves at work and in life every single day, and having our work be meaningful and having a sense of belonging. And so what I love about this picture is it shows the rise of that. And then on the heels of it, you can see BizCorp, dry since 1884. This company has been championing what I call the 7 words of a dying organization. We've always done things this way, or we've never done things that way. And companies who have, that's been their motto, we can name them, are no longer in business. And you can see some of the people illustrated outside of this business. You know, there's one guy there, he's eating his sandwich, his back is turned to the tsunami. He has no idea it's even coming. The other guy is dressed in his business suit. He's got his cup of joe. He's in his morning routine. He's ready to face the day, oblivious to things that are changing around him. And then you have this other guy who sees kind of a mist in the air, throws up in his umbrella and says, forget it. We're just going to keep on moving forward. And they're oblivious to what's about to happen. And then there's these other people with surfboards that are running towards the wave, that see it, are embracing it, and are getting ready to ride it. And this is a great illustration of what has been happening generationally, even over the last 10 years, as we look at the different ebbs and flows of generations in the workforce, whether that is baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z. There's a great quote that I heard a little while back, and it's this: when the rate of change outside an organization is greater than the rate of change inside an organization, the end is near. And so what has happened is the rate of change was already accelerating outside of organizations faster than they can keep up with. And COVID was like gasoline on the fire. And there's a lot of companies that now are struggling to stay relevant and to engage and to stay connected with their workforce and their client base with the loss of the physical manifestation of the workplace. And now they find themselves in a dilemma. So let's talk a little bit about just some background behind that. You know, this idea of purpose is not something that I invented. Obviously, it's been around for a long time. There's plenty of authors on it. There's a reason that we're having the Purpose Summit in May and featuring 30 different speakers. 17 of them are authors on the concept of purpose in the workplace in some form, shape, because this conversation is so timely. Check out this headline from the HBR magazine in spring of 2020. Now, if you know how magazines work, you'll know that this magazine was put together just before COVID hit. So COVID wasn't even on the scene yet. We were in COVID in spring of 2020, but this magazine was put together in January and February before it was released in March and April. And if you look at some of the titles that are in the table of contents of HBR, why are we here? Put purpose at the core of your strategy, creating a purpose-driven organization, the dual purpose playbook. Your company's purpose is not its vision, mission, and values. That's a talk for a different time. A lot of confusion there because purpose is not your why, purpose is not your mission, purpose is not your vision, it's not your values. Those all support your purpose. Another talk for another time. Your corporate purpose will ring hollow if your company's actions don't back it up. Probably the most important sentence on that page. How to instill purpose. 4 hard questions to ask about your company's purpose. Purpose is good. Shared purpose is better. Probably the second most important sentence on that page. So this is straight out of HBR. So what is this shift that I'm talking about? What I'm alluding to in the purpose economy is a change of currency, in how we communicate and what matters. You see, for the longest time, we traded time for money. We did it haphazardly. We would just give hours of our life away that we could never get back, whether that meant working 70 hours a week, 80 hours a week, working double time, working holidays, weekends. We were the generation, and when I say we, I'm talking Generation X and baby boomers. We were the generation that were not home at the kitchen table for dinner every night, that were not at our kids' recitals, that were not at the baseball games, that were not at any of the stuff that really mattered because we were trading time for dollars to build up our nest egg, to retire and delay gratify towards a better time. The next generation that's in the workforce, millennials and Generation Z, don't think that way. And now millennials make up more than 50% of the workforce, which has been, that shift happened about 2017. I'll show you a slide on that in a second. But that gave birth to the underlying root cause problem that's at the core of the return to work, return to office, or work remote dilemma. Was this underlying problem behind COVID. And I'm going to get to that in a second. But you need to understand that the mindset of the workforce is no longer trading time for money. It's trading money for time. People are willing to change jobs, change careers, change industries, change professions, and take a pay cut to do work that is more meaningful and provides a greater sense of belonging that is aligned with their purpose of who they are and the contribution that they can make. You see, where companies in the past used to recruit people based off of a paycheck and perks, and that worked for Generation X and boomers, for millennials and Generation Z, it's about purpose and partnership. It is not necessarily about paycheck and perks. So this was already well in the works prior to COVID. And so if we look at some of the data behind that, you can see this is from a research center of some of the curve. You could see this is a slide of generation flow in the workplace since 1994. Boomers obviously made up 66% of the workforce in 1997. They have since drastically fell off. Generation X made up about 40% in 1994 and crossed 50% in 2015. You can see this silent or greatest generation has pretty much all retired. And then you could see this massive growth right through the middle of this graph of the millennial generation, which now makes up more than 50% of the workforce and is estimated to be 75% of the workforce by 2025, which is only 4 years away, folks. So what are the 2 red arrows in the middle? Well, there's the 2008 arrow, and then there's the 2014 arrow where you could see millennials eclipsed the boomer generation, which is when a lot of companies and organizations started changing their work model, allowing more autonomy, allowing more work from home, creating more shared space, more open space. This has been in the works for 6 years. But what happened in 2008? In 2008, we experienced the great fall of our economy. Well, what does that mean? That meant that the millennials in 2008 were old enough to watch how we had been operating for decades, trading time for money to build up a nest egg and delay gratify, only to watch half of it dissipate in 1 year, like that. And they were old enough at that point to say, you know what? Not me. Not going to do that. So something shifted in their mind where all of a sudden time became more valuable than money. Sustainability became more valuable than temporal. And that is what gave birth to the purpose economy, a lot which Aaron Hurst wrote about in his book in 2013. So it's important to understand where this transition has taken place. A phrase that we had used for a long time is this idea of work-life balance. We are no longer in an economy of work-life balance. We are in an economy of work-life integration. What does that mean? Well, for years, the idea of work-life balance was a trade-off. Do I trade time from my personal life to trade time from my work life? What are the sacrifices? You can't have both, right? I'm either at work or I'm living my life. There is a drastic mindset between what I did when I am on the life side of the balance and what I did when I'm on the work side of the balance. Well, there was already the shift prior to COVID of shifting to a mental mindset of work-life integration, largely fueled by the next generation. They didn't want work-life balance. They didn't want traditional 8 to 5 hours. And, you know, I used to be the bigger complainer of the next generation. I used to say, you know what, I can't hire millennials anymore. I can't do it. They don't want to come in on time. They want to start at 10 o'clock. They want to put in 6 hours. They want to put in 30 hours a week. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get them to have the same work ethic that I had had and that my parents had had and so forth and so on, until I spent years reading and studying about the shift that I just talked about that had taken place. And what I realized was if you could connect them with purpose and partnership, how their gifts, talents, abilities, and contributions contribute to the greater purpose and mission of the organization. And again, purpose and mission are different, but how they contribute to those things, what their place is in that, and what their role is in seeing that thing move forward, they would actually work hours beyond what our generation worked, but they would work them in a different manner. They would work them around their life, in their life. They might be up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning doing some work and then go to the gym or whatever the case is and meet someone for coffee or breakfast and then get in the office at 10 or whatever. And then, you know, they wouldn't call it a day at 5 o'clock. They might go do something else or go to a networking event or whatever. And then they might be back on their computer at 7 o'clock or night or whatever. So the idea of this work-life integration is critical to understand the root cause of the remote return dilemma that we're in, because this was the mental shift that was in. And this slide, I didn't put it on the bottom here. This slide actually came from a hospital. And to give you a reference, it was from 7 different PhDs that did a study on this mental shift that had already been taking place that COVID just accelerated. What does the balance versus integration mean? Well, it's a shift from trade-off to how do I fit my home, my family, my work, my career, my well-being and my health, my community and my sense of connecting into the 24 hours that I have in a day. These are all things that are important to all of us. Our work, our career, our home, our family, our well-being, our health. The biggest reason that people don't work out consistently, time. The biggest reason that people don't invest in their family, into their spouses, into their kids, time. The biggest reason that people don't achieve their goals at work, time. The biggest reason that people don't make the contributions in terms of volunteerism and things that they want to do in their community, time. And so we're all given 24 hours and we're trying to fit these 4 things into that. And so what COVID has done has forced us to address that equation. By sitting at home for the last year, we've all been forced to figure out how to balance that, how to integrate all of that, because where we are all of a sudden doesn't change. We no longer have that physical barrier where we can jump in the car, mentally disconnect, leave what we need to leave at home, get in the car, focus on just that top circle of work and career in our life. For I can't tell you how many times I said, you know what, I'm going to leave early and go to the gym at the end of the day. And then I get home and my wife says, did you go to the gym? Nope. Right? Why? Because I sacrificed the well-being and health circle because I needed to fit more into the work and career circle. And so understanding the integration behind this is critical to solving the dilemma, because it's not going away. And there is a massive impact on productivity from working at home. There's positive impact, but there's negative impact. So you could see that all of a sudden there's an increased profit or productivity because there is no commute time. There is no jumping in that car. Some people, 55% of people, say they have a better ability to focus at home. They're less distracted. So there are pros to that, but there is also decreased productivity. A big piece due to lack of work mindset. It's hard to get myself into that work mindset, and then a lack of dedicated workspace, physically having those barriers around us. So there's some trade-offs here. So there's not a one answer to everybody. And we're going to get into this because at the end, and for you D-type personalities that are like, just get to the answer already, the end is there's not a magic pill. There's not a, hey, everyone needs to return to work or everyone needs to continue staying from home. There's going to need to be an integrated approach based off of preference by employee, but also based off of performance and productivity by employee, because there will be some people that maybe their preference is to work at home, but their productivity and their focus has decreased, and that needs to be addressed. There are going to be others that their preference is to be at work and they can't. And because of that, their productivity and performance has decreased, and that needs to be addressed, both in supportive manners. So how do we do that? And we'll get to that in a second, but I just want to show you a few more stats. Here's the Predictive Index did a study. One of the biggest disconnects around performance is that 47% of their behavior profiles that they have recently polled say that they feel less confident in their company's business strategy now than they did before going remote. So there's this loss of confidence and connectivity to my company's purpose, my company's mission, my company's strategy, which is not good for motivation and performance. And, you know, if we dig deeper into some of the analytics behind this, here is, you will see how this ties directly back to generations, which we started this webinar with. Here's a slide that shows you new remote employees, oriented remote employees, and tenured remote employees. And it's safe to say, if you just went off of a time span, that tenured remote employees are probably, they've been there longer, are probably Generation X or baby boomers. Oriented remote employees are maybe older millennials or Generation X. And new remote employees are probably the next generation. And you can see a direct correlation to their response on working remote. Those of us who've been around for a long time that have wanted to work from home and have the discipline and the ability to be able to focus and create work hours for ourselves. I locked myself in my office from when I had to be home, you know, from 8 until 5 o'clock, and didn't come out other than to make a cup of coffee because that discipline was there. So it was more a better experience for those generations. You could see for the next generations where they're looking for that sense of partnership, that sense of belonging, that sense of being connected to the company's mission and strategy and as a part of the team, you could see the scores are much lower, particularly when you look at belonging and productivity. But the one thing that we all have in common, every single generation, doesn't matter whether you've been there a long time or you're new, is not one person has had a positive experience in terms of their work mattering and feeling like their sense of belonging is being met in the remote format. And you can see that all of those are below the graph. And that is critical. Why is that critical? Because when you look at the state of the remote report that came out in 2020, you'll see the biggest struggles are lack of communication and collaboration, a sense of loneliness, not being able to unplug. And then you can get into some of the obvious ones: distractions at home, different time zones, staying motivated, trying to find vacation time, reliable Wi-Fi, some other things. But the top three: collaboration, communication, loneliness, not being able to unplug. Again, the same issues are showing up, and these are all different studies that are showing the same data, right? An imbalance, a lack of integration, an inability to feel like you matter or that you belong to something that you can contribute to. So in order to solve and manage the remote return dilemma, we need to understand a couple things. We need to understand the problem that we are trying to solve. The problem isn't simply, do we work at home or do we work at the office? Do we allow people to work at home? Do we allow people to work at the office? What does MDHH say? What are the guidelines? The governor in Michigan just shared that the guidelines for remote workforces are going to stay in effect until October for another 6 months. And there's some more information about that we're not going to get into here today, because that means different things. So how do we navigate these next 6 months? What is the problem we need to solve? Well, we need to solve collaboration. We need to solve communication. We need to solve a sense of belonging. We need to solve creating productivity environments that are conducive to productivity. We need to solve these things that support our employees, our teams, our tribes to contribute their best of everything that they have to offer within themselves to the greater contribution that they are a part of. How do we do that? Well, let's take a look at some things. Before we do that, one more slide I want to share you. This was one other survey. So again, this was a Survey Monkey. This is Slack data from 9,000 knowledgeable workers across different industries. Again, you can see that the number one thing, feeling that your work is meaningful, 35%, more than anything else, more than being paid, right? Again, people are trading money for time because they want to have a sense of mattering, want to have a sense of belonging. And of course, there's the other things that traditionally would have been at the top, right? Having opportunities to advance, control over how you do your work, right? Those are almost half, if not more, of making sure that your work matters and that it's meaningful and that you belong. So what can you do? So here are some pros and cons from the C12 group. Gene Jernigan mentioned that, I'm a ambassador member of the C12 group. The C12 group is a peer advisory group for CEOs and business owners, faith-based organization. A lot of them come to work recognizing that they have to steward their business and steward their teams. And this is actually content that after I had prepared this talk was a core segment that we did with 20 plus CEOs in the Michigan market and 2,500 CEOs nationwide did a case study on this. And this is some of the content from that. So notable benefits and challenges of working from anywhere. So if we look at benefits to receive, right? The benefits of working anywhere: increase resilience. They use work-life balance. I tend to shift that to work-life integration. We talked about that. Expanded access to the talent pool, because now you can bring people on from additional regions that maybe you couldn't have before. Accelerated completion and efficiencies over different time zones. Now you can kind of work around the clock because you can have teams in different time zone. Increased customer markets without increased capital. Insulation against, inclement weather, pandemic hotspots. You could shift work based. Michigan's a big hotspot right now. You could pivot to different, work to different areas of the country remotely. Diminished operation costs, customized flexible work environments, and establish productivity gains, which I caveat that because we talked that there's been both an increase and decrease in productivity. What are the challenges that we need to overcome? Organic, intentional communication. Again, the number one thing that is a gap right now: belonging, communication. Socialization and camaraderie, belonging, communication. Visibility of team health, disruption of team alignment, timely decision-making. There's less of an opportunity for talent development. People are not being developed the way that they used to, which is critical because in a lack of development leads to a lack of performance and a lack of achieving optimal potential, which I'll share in a little bit. Data, security, regulation, accountability, cultural unity, and retraining. These are all challenges that we need to overcome. Well, what are some ways? From the same exact segment, here's some things that you can do that are kind of a blend that have nothing to do really with whether or not you go one way or the other. But you could encourage employees to replicate the transition of traditional commute by setting aside time before they have to clock in and after to create healthy mental white space, right? Whether that's for some people, you know, again, C12, again, as I mentioned, is a faith-based organization. So in here for them, that might be reading scripture, praying. For others, it might be meditating or mindfulness. It might be walking in silence. It might be listening to a podcast. It might be working out. Whatever they need to do as a buffer to jump into their day to get their mind, body, and spirit ready for the day. Do you build that into their time frame, or are you scheduling Zoom meetings at 7:30, 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning because we have greater capacity? You need to build a buffer in the beginning and the end of the day to allow people that work-life integration to get their mind in a spot where they can be at their best to contribute to the day. Build physical transitions. A dedicated workspace has surprising power over mental posture. Allowing for mental transitions to work from home, even a closed door, allows an employee to be at work with privacy needed for virtual meetings, phone calls, and confidential information. Are we encouraging our teams to build physical transitions in the places that we have them working? For a lot of people, maybe they can't work at home anymore. I know it's almost impossible for me to work at home between kids, young kids, a brand new puppy that's barking in the background and squeaking. And even for my wife's mental well-being, you know, she recognizes that, you know, there's traditional work hours, but, you know, I got to be in a zone when I'm thinking through things. And a lot of times there's the knock on the door and it's, hey, do you just have a second? Do you just have 1 second? And that 1 second translates to a 15-minute mental reset. So for those of you that don't know, whenever you're focusing on something, if you interrupt that with whatever it is, a phone call, social media, if you interrupt your productivity flow, it takes 15 minutes to get your mind back into that flow. So it's never just a minute. Again, leads to decreased productivity. Physical barriers are important. You know, maybe I would encourage, if there's co-working spaces that are available, if you're not allowing them to go to the office, but they can go to co-working spaces, have them go to co-working spaces. Offer to pay for a membership for co-working spaces that they could go to so that they could create physical barriers if home is an issue. And then the last, book balance time. At home, workers need a rhythm away from their computer. Have their team put balance time on their calendar. Schedule balance time. Encourage them to schedule balance time, and then keep that commitment as they would any other meeting, right? A short break in their mid-morning, a lightly slugger like lunchtime, mid-afternoon pick me up. You know, one of the things that I did when we were forced to stay at home was I drink a lot of coffee, a lot of coffee. And I probably, you know, if I'm being honest, on the low end, have 4 cups, you know, before 3 o'clock, right? I probably have 3 before noon and then another one around 1 or 2 o'clock. I would associate getting my coffee with physically going for a walk, and kind of using that time to reflect on what I've gotten done for the day, what I need to get done for the day, and using that productively and not just running and getting my coffee and jumping right back in. Build in that balance time. These are critical. What else can you do? Well, so there are technology solutions to this, and this isn't a shameless plug, but I do want to share it with you. One of the things that we at Purpose Point worked very diligently on over this last year and a half is a next generation platform that we call Engage. It's a text-based system because we know that everyone's inundated with emails. People aren't reading emails the way that they used to because of the amount of emails that we're getting. And open rates and read-through rates are really, really low. We did some psychological studies, and the fact is that 97% of every person on the planet opens up a text message within 3 minutes of getting that text message. I mean, I could look at my phone, for example, and on my phone are all of these little red dots above my apps, right? And none of them annoy me. In fact, I have 52,646 above my email, and I have 0 time to clear those out. But that one that's above my text box is driving me nuts. I can't wait till we're done this call so I can find out who that one text message is from. There's something about that box that we have to clear out. So that box gets our attention. So that is the main method if you want to break through the noise of communication, because we recognize that communication, effective communication, is something that we have to solve to keep our teams integrated and working together and performing and moving forward, regardless of whether they choose to work at home or at the office. We need to communicate effectively. So what we did was we partnered with a company called Days to Happy that created technology, and we created content where companies can customize communication throughout the week to either send messages to their teams, recognize their employees so that they have a sense of belonging and that their work matters, listen to them and get feedback. This completely replaces the traditional engagement survey, which after 20 years in the operations and HR space have been the bane of my existence, because I hate that we get all this data back once a year and then try to move the needle 3 basis points and celebrate that. We track engagement based off of communication response every single week and provide data back to companies that's real time and live that they can move the needle on week to week to week, and then send content that's relevant to keep their teams connected and moving forward, right? Training and development. We mentioned that training and development is at an all-time low. If you're not growing your people, you're not growing your company. How can you train and develop people effectively without having them sit necessarily in front of 8 hours worth of Zoom sessions when we know that they're multitasking in addition to doing that and not really truly developing? So this isn't going to be a commercial for this. If you want to learn more about this, you can always reach out to Adam Ritchie, our Director of Client Partnerships at Purpose Point, or Lisa Oprita, our Director of Communications at Purpose Point. They'd be glad to share more information on this. But there are technology solutions that will do a lot of this for you, right? One of the things, we had a call with, actually, I think it was our last workforce committee, Gene, that we had where we talked, about a lot of the new laws and things that are in place. And, I get it. There's compliance issues and things that we need to solve. How do you tell an employee that you've just allowed to work from home for a year that maybe is not performing, that they have to come to the office? Or how do you tell an employee that's a high performer that's been doing their job great that they have to come to the office after they've contributed at such a high level for a year? What is your justification for bringing them back in? So measuring engagement more than once a year or more than once a quarter is critical, because engagement is tied to performance. So unless you have a weekly pulse on the engagement of your team, you do not have supporting documentation to have a conversation with your team on which environment, remote or office, best supports their ability to perform in their role. You need to be able to have systems and technology and documentation and communication in place to best support your people, to show that you're doing everything that you can to communicate, to develop, and to support them in their role within whatever environment you are deciding or dictating that they need to work in order to support any conversations that you might need to have around performance. And if you do this well, and we can talk about companies that do this well, what good truly looks like would mean less performance reviews, would mean less of those discussions, because companies that have a high engaged workforce, that are communicating often, effectively, and measuring engagement more often and supporting and developing their teams, don't need to have performance discussions like other companies have to have performance discussions. But development is so, so critical. You have to understand that at the root of this conversation are the P's and D's. What are the P's and D's? The P's are purpose, people, performance, and potential. We all want the greatest potential out of our people. We all want high performers on our teams. And often companies are so focused on either trying to attract potential or drive performance that they're missing the most two important P's, which are purpose and people. Companies that truly develop their people drive them towards a greater sense of purpose organizationally, and are focused on the individual's purpose. who that person is, what their gifts, talents, abilities, experience, and insights are, and how they could utilize those and flourish within the greater sense of the purpose of the company. Companies that drive their people towards purpose and close what Adam Ritchie on our team has coined the IO gap, the gap between individual performance and operational and organizational performance. Companies that close that gap by driving people towards purpose, the byproduct of that is high performing teams and unprecedented potential that was not possible before. So you need to understand, you have to focus on this connectivity piece of purpose and people to reach optimal performance and potential. Companies that do that well are developers. There are companies that drive performance. They're so focused on driving performance that they don't develop potential. And those are just doers, right? They're grinders. They move forward, but they don't move forward at the exponential rate that they could if they're not developing their teams. There are teams that develop potential without driving performance, and those tend to be distractors. A lot of squirrels happen, right? We could do this, we could do this, we could do this, but we don't move the needle forward. And then there are teams that don't do either, and they're distractors. Impactful teams focus on developing people and driving performance, which results in increased potential performance. High performance and high potential are byproducts of doing that well. You got to understand which quadrant your organization needs to be in and how to get there. And the key is connecting your team to a sense of belonging, mattering, purpose, partnership, giving them the tools and the resources to do their job well, and communicating, recognizing, getting feedback often. If you solve those problems, the remote to work or the return to work remote, return to office remote dilemma minimizes, because that's the true problem that we're trying to solve. Now, if you're doing that well, you can then have supportive conversations with your teams on what best suits them. Where does your team member thrive? Is it at home? Is it remotely? Is it in the office? What environment is conducive to them having optimal performance, achieving their purpose, and reaching their optimal potential? You have to solve that problem. There are tools, there are systems, there's lots and lots of books that you could tap into on this topic. Gene mentioned the Purpose Summit that we have coming up in May. Again, shameless plug, but it's too important to not talk about. This is just some, there's only 24 faces here, but there's over 30 different authors and speakers on these topics that we're talking about. She mentioned Ken Blanchard. Ken Blanchard has written over 60 books in his life in terms of leadership, culture, development, everything that people are trying to solve. He's 82 years old. He's been doing this since his 20s. He'll be keynoting at the end of the Purpose Summit. Scott Miller, who used to be the executive vice president and CMO of Franklin Covey Companies, he's coming in here from Utah and going to be doing a keynote at the summit and talking about marketing mess to leadership success and management mess to leadership success and marketing mess to brand success, and understanding how you need to position and pivot within the context of this conversation. Aaron Hurst, who we talked about, who wrote The Purpose Economy. Telva Magruder, Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer of GM. I mean, I could go on and on. Richard Sheraton. There's so many great people here, but there are companies coming in from Georgia, Texas, Boston, California, converging on this conversation of how do we get from where we're at to where we need to be when it turns to supporting our teams in the middle of this dilemma. So if you haven't checked that out, go to thepurposesummit.com. And even if you don't go to the summit, I would encourage you to check out the authors and speakers that are listed and get their books, read them, digest them. There's so many great books of organizations that are thriving and doing this well, who have solved this dilemma. I want to share this, and then we'll kind of wrap up here because I went past the amount of time that I wanted to, because I want to leave room for some questions. There are three types of people in this pandemic. There are those that are panicking, which never does any good. There are those that are pandering, that have just been waiting for this to pass doing the same thing over and over again, trying to return to what they hope would be normal. We're never going back to normal, right? The pandemic exposed a lot of fallacies out there that we now need to adjust to in terms of the conversation of remote return to the office. And there are those that are positioning. We've heard it said before that there are those that make things happen, watch things happen, and those that say what happened. You need to decide, where do you fall? Are you positioning yourself, your team, and your company? Are you making things happen? Or are you pandering and watching things happen and panicking and saying what happened? The goal of this conversation today was certainly not to impress you with knowledge or to position a summit or our technology. The goal was to expose to you the conversation that we're dealing with, the root causes of what's going on and what's been building for a long time, and to point you towards resources that can help navigate you through this, to position yourself to come out stronger on the other side of this, so that you and your organization can fulfill the purpose that you were created for. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jean for the remaining time that we have for any questions you may have.
Well, first, thank you, Davin. I have pages of notes here that I've been taking while you've gone through this, and thank you for that. So one question that I received is, you mentioned that there were some examples of organizations that have done this well. And I think it would benefit all of us to hear, some of those examples, if you could.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll give you three, and two of them are local, one's distant, and they're different size organizations, right? So I'll start a local company, well, one of the local companies in Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor, there's a company called Menlo Innovations, and I actually have two of Richard Sheridan's books on my desk. One is called Joy Inc. The other one is called Chief Joy Officer. Rich Sheridan wrote both of these books, published by Penguin Random House, and he's the co-founder and CEO of Menlo Innovations. They're a software company. They develop software, and they have been working on the work environment for years. They had over 3,000 companies from around the world come to them prior to the pandemic, come to Ann Arbor just to observe their people working in their workplace, to understand what was going on at Menlo Innovations, because they're a software company. And if you read his books, you'll understand what they did. But when we went into pandemic mode, they just took their best practices, all the root cause problems we just talked about. How do we give people a sense of belonging, mattering, drive them towards a greater sense of purpose, remove red tape, remove bureaucracy, remove fear, develop them, create support? How do we take all of these things that are the root cause of the conversation and transition those virtually to our workforce remotely? And then they started doing virtual tours of Menlo. They've done 3,000 virtual tours of Menlo this year of how their team operates remotely, because the issue isn't work from home or return to the office. The issue is solving those underlying problems in either context. So Menlo Innovations is a great one. I recommend you check them out, and I'd recommend that you read Joy Inc. or Chief Joy Officer by Richard. Richard will also be keynoting day 2 at the Emerald or at the Purpose Summit. He'll be there, and whether you can be there in person, his talk will be virtual. It is also available virtual. Another example is Paslin. Paslin is a manufacturing company in Shelby Township. They have roughly 700 employees. They do $300 million a year in sales. They build assembly lines for the automotive industry. And at the beginning of 2020, I had the privilege of being an executive coach for Dave Taylor, who's the CEO of Paslin. I wrote about him in the book, Finding Purpose at Work. And, we talked about, we redid their purpose, their mission, their vision, their values. We redid their entire culture and put an entire L&D leadership development training plan in place for the year. And I said, Rick, Dave, at the end of the year, what would good look like? And he said, we're a manufacturing company in Macomb County. I would love if our team can get recognized for winning Manufacturer of the Year at the end of 2020. That was the conversation in January. Then the pandemic hit in March. They had to shut everything down, send everybody home. So what did we do? We still trained people. We still developed people. We took 100 of their leaders through situational leadership, SL2, which is Blanchard's #1 program. He's championed since 1979. Developed their team. We rolled out the Engage platform for communication, tactics, all of that. If we had more time, I would show you some amazing videos of testimony of how their employees sent him video messages thanking them for changing their lives personally as the CEO during this time. And at the end of the year, they were 6 to 10% more engaged in every category across every dynamic and demographic in their company than they were at the beginning of the year before COVID. And you know what? They won Manufacturer of the Year. Why? Because they solved the underlying problems, even though their workforce was shut down. Last example I'll give you, company out in South Bend, Indiana called Lippert. Lippert is a $3 billion publicly traded company with 12,000 employees, global manufacturing. They're the #1 supplier of RV parts, and the industry has been on fire this year because everyone's just packing up, buying RVs, and working remotely. They can't keep things in stock. So they're having their busiest, most profitable year ever. They can't hire fast enough. They have 872 positions available right now that they can't fill. They can't hire fast enough. Their #1 focus is not building RV parts. If you were to talk to the CEO of Lippert, which is Jason Lippert, who was on Fox and Bloomberg and MSN and on Cranes, he was on a myriad of shows over the last couple of weeks because they're just crushing it right now. And he said this, our #1 focus isn't building RV parts fast enough. Our #1 focus every day is when our employees come to work every day, have we provided an opportunity that make them better spouses and better parents when they go home to serve their families during this pandemic? Are we doing that? The RV parts are just the means to help us, help our people become better at who they are when they're not here. That is their focus, right? How do they find the time to do that? They're understaffed, global company, having their craziest year ever, but they are laser focused on developing and supporting their people. Incidentally, as busy as they are, their entire leadership team, their top 20 leaders, including their VP of Leadership and Culture, Amber Selking, are jumping in RVs and buses and coming here to Mount Clemens, Michigan for the Purpose Summit for the entire week. They're coming up on Monday, going home on Friday, because even though they're busy, they recognize that this conversation is critical to their growth, and they're treating this as their leadership retreat for the week. Amber Selking will be doing a keynote at the end of day 2. So again, it may sound like a lot of shameless plugs, but there's a lot of great examples of organizations who are taking excuses away, right? I don't have time. I don't have, we have this challenge. We have this challenge. We're understaffed, whatever. Listen, an excuse is a reason stuffed with a lie. You can either make a difference or you can make excuses, but you cannot make both. The companies that are winning right now, that are solving this dilemma, are finding ways to overcome the excuses, to support and develop, engage, and communicate effectively with their people.
Okay, so on that note then, because one of the key takeaways that I picked up through this last hour, and we'll open this up if anyone has any questions. I haven't gotten anything in the chat recently, but this was another follow-up. You talked about the lack of development leads to lack of performance. And then you talk about, a couple of key ways that you can do that. But you also talk about positioning and, that purpose is different from mission. So for everyone on this, as far as a takeaway, if you wanted to start by identifying at least the level or do a litmus test of your employees and their satisfaction as well as their engagement, what might be a couple of key things that you would suggest, maybe 1 or 2 ways that they can do that is something that they can just do with sweat equity, meaning not costing anything? Because obviously we've gotten some great examples of ways that they could do it otherwise. So
Yep. So the biggest thing right now, you just said it, right? What's the difference between purpose and mission? And it's really what's the difference between purpose and why, which is tied to mission. And what can you do right now to get clarity around those to solve that? Because like I said, the number one problem that you have to solve right now, where you need to start, is making sure that your teams understand that their work matters. I mean, the elephant in the room right now, I mean, we could talk about suicide and mental illness rates and depression. People, those things are through the roof right now because they've lost the ability to physically see that their work contributes to something that matters. You need to solve that. And not just from a business sense, but from a caring for humanity sense. You need to understand that there are people every single day right now that are struggling to and asking themselves, do I matter? Do I make a difference? If I wasn't here tomorrow, would anybody care? You as a leader, you as a team need to reinforce that their work matters, that they contribute to a greater purpose. So the difference between purpose and why, really quick, to give you kind of some kindling to start this conversation with your teams. Purpose is your reason for being. It is why you exist. It is what each and every single one of your team members have inside of them, their gifts, their talents, their abilities, their insights, and how they contribute those to the work that they do that leads to the greater purpose of your company, which is what you exist to do. The products, services, things that you build or do or offer that solve the world's problems. Patrick Lencioni says that the purpose of every company is not to make money, it's to improve the quality of human life in some way. How does your company improve the quality of human life in some way through these times? And how does the work that your employees do contribute to that cause? You got to connect those dots. And it's very, I mean, it's literally slowing down, calling a timeout and saying, okay, how are we as a company impacting humanity positively right now? And how are we communicating that with each of our team members so that they recognize that they're a part of that, that they matter, that their work matters? And then you go deeper and challenge your leaders and different levels of your organizations to have that conversation with your teams. It may be as simple as just a 1 hour Zoom call with every team member, you know, not their whole company at once, but champion and say, okay, if I lead a team of 10 people, or if I lead a team of 25 people, we're going to have a coffee Zoom and we're going to talk about how does each one of our unique individuals, gifts, talents, abilities contribute right now to the greater purpose of our organization? And what is the difference that we're making together? That's the most important thing you can do right now. Have that timeout call, right? People need to understand what they're a part of. Why is your reason for doing? Purpose is your reason for being. Why is your reason for doing? It's the motivation, and it's connected to your who. These are the stories that you tell that, you know, when you talk about how your work impacts humanity and you share stories of, we made a difference in this person's life or in this person's life or wherever because you came to work today. That's the why. That's the mission. That's the who. That reinforces the purpose. They work synergistically. So you need to do two things. You need to, one, gain clarity on what it is that your company is doing right now that adds value to humanity, your purpose, your reason for being, and communicate that clearly with your teams, and then champion your leaders within organizations to have a 1 hour Zoom call to dive a little bit deeper into how each and every single one of their team members is contributing to that and how their work matters on a daily basis. Secondly, you need to find examples of whose, of your mission, those that you have impacted, lives that have been changed through what it is that you do. And then you need to share those with your teams to reinforce the purpose.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, really quickly, because I know we're out of time. Of course, thank you, Davin. But otherwise, thank you all. We hope you have a great day.